What's amazing to me is that when I surrender to the desire to write something which doesn't yet have a known value. In other words, when I wanted to write Robin Hood, I could tell that it was because I'd had the privilege of having a son with my wife and looking at the world and thinking that there needed to be altruistic heroism as opposed to watching the Schwarzeneggers and the Stallones just murdering people and calling that heroism. And that was a gut instinct. And what it was answered by was this concept that I came up with of wanting to put a Muslim and a Christian side by side in the same story and both helping each other. Because the two dogmas usually are opposing, and even the Catholics and the Protestants were killing each other in Ireland. And so it's like, so how do you speak to that world? Unconsciously, I just knew I needed to write a Robin Hood. And I went to 3 studios and they told me it was a stupid idea. No one wants to see guys in tights with swords, which became a hit movie. And my own partner was really unsure about putting an Arab into a story that was British. And so I was determined not to quit because it felt in my gut that I needed to do this as opposed to there was a commercial possibility for it. And one assistant that was working with us said, if you try and write it, I'll help. And that tiny little flame of support was what enabled me to start page 1 and just to see what would come out of me. And what I've discovered is that when you write like that, and it is an undogmatic writing, and you don't necessarily, I sometimes get the end of a movie and then go search for the beginning, that tends to come out with more force, more emotion, more voice, and more specialness. And as long as you, as the writer, can keep saying, be scary, keep doing the things you weren't supposed to do, keep exploring to see where it'll take you as opposed to where you're supposed to be, because that negative voice that sits in our head is not a usable judge of what we're creating. But it sits there trying to help us from doing things that seem dangerous. So it's going, well, don't go into that cave, you know. But it's now saying, don't write that. It's a piece of shit, don't write that, because that'll keep you safe from criticism. So it's terrible. And what you do is you have to get rid of that and you have to just write. And you can't judge what you're writing as it's coming out of you. And really good writing, which is the writing that you don't even feel possessed you. It's coming from some other place like channel dictation. That stuff's wondrous. So I've written very few scripts that came to me that way, but each of them had a poetic center. Each of them had a thesis of some kind about my life. Each of them had characters who had lost mothers. And many of my scripts have repetitive themes when I allow myself to write them like that, which starts to think of myself as kind of like a carved wood block out of, you know, the old printing press. I mean, I'm just changing a few pieces around it, but this same story keeps coming out. Someone also said to me once, I love reading your scripts and crying at the end. I go, what? And all my scripts have people that get reconciled at the end. They're not sexual. They are parted people who come together with joy. And they choke me up every time. And twice I have written scripts just purely because they got endings. And then I had to go search to get the rest out of me, feeling foolish, feeling like this is a waste of time, feeling like there's no market for this, and feeling like I'm letting my partners down. So when I wrote Mull Flanders, my agenda was not to tell my partners because they had sort of poo-pooed me out of other stories without even knowing that they were so fragile at that point. And I knew if I told them I was going to write a story about a 17th century woman that I didn't even know what it was yet, they were not going to be too kind to me. So I didn't tell them, and I wrote it in my spare time once the inspiration hit. And only my assistant, who had got a thesis in She-Rose at Brown, was involved, and my co-partner in it. So I go off to the meetings, come back, and start writing. I'd be in bed next to my wife and writing. And this literally poured out of me in a 5-week period. And I'm watching all the other stories I've ever written get filtered. And I'm watching pieces of dialogue, and I'm watching Lego pieces of other ideas sort of forming and flowing and going into this. And it was the most dynamic, extraordinary, and beautiful writing experience I've ever had. And I wish to heck I could find where that switch was to get to that again, because it's intoxicating.